Saram, I offer my most humble pranams to Bhagawan for this opportunity, and I offer my thanks to everyone in Region 3 for inviting me to speak and to share the lessons I've learned in my spiritual journey in over 41 years of engagement in the Psi organization. Um, I've been an officer in the Psi organization for 29 years, and I must say it's been the greatest blessing. And it's a journey that has evolved over a long period of time and evolved slowly with many, many lessons. It's been a journey, I dare say, in an odd sort of way, less with the physical side and more with the Sai resident in my heart. And I say that because I was not brought up in a family that traveled to Bharti very often. And even when I became an officer and started going more regularly, there was always, I was one of many, many that went to Bharti during the birthday or during Guru Purnima. And so the journey has been a journey with the Sai resident in me. And now, especially, that's the most valuable thing. Um, in the past few years, I dare say 4 or 5 years perhaps, my whole understanding of why I come to the Sai organization has really taken a 180 degrees turn. My goal has changed. It's changed away from the often heard sweeping proclamations of love for Swami and his mission to a much clearer sense of what these words entail and the personal responsibility attached to them. One of the gifts I believe that is given to us is the gift of hindsight, the ability to look back and look afresh on our past actions. It allows us to draw from the past, learn from the past, but without living in the past. Another gift, perhaps more valuable, is the ability to reflect upon those lessons in our past so that we may have a better today. But an even greater gift is the power within us to practice Swami's teachings today to change our lives forever. It is that power to make most of his legacy. And I say that again, practicing his teachings today is the power to make the most of his legacy to each of us. And for me, that is what loving Swami means. And I will touch upon that again later. But in this power of practice, we have the power to give meaning to our lives and why we have taken birth. Um, my reflections have always been an integral part of my spiritual journey. And, I feel very blessed because looking back, for some reason, although, as I said to you earlier, my family did not travel to Puttaparthi very often, and even way later when I did personally do so because I was an officer, for some reason, I was deeply, deeply attached to the name Sathya Sai Baba. I can't account for it, I can't explain it, but I was deeply attached to that being. And over time, I came to realize, because he said so, that he lives in our heart. And that's where that relationship took hold. And so these reflections I've taken in my spiritual journey, I know one thing: Swami has always walked with me every step of the way, and he has guided my progress. In my reflections, looking back over so many years, I realized that in my spiritual journey, I've moved through some very, very clear stages. There was the very first stage, the initial stage of tiptoeing on the fringes of the Sai organization. And that was when I was probably 18 or 19 years old, before I went to university, and even during the years I was at university and I came back. And that is when I believed the adage, the world is my oyster. And so there was always this, well, I'm coming to the Sai Center, but the world awakes me for me to develop my career, build a life, etc., etc. But after so many years and reading a bit more and having more experience of the Sai organization, and I've come to realize how this adage that we all so dearly attach ourselves to, the world is my oyster, is actually untrue. Because the world, in most instances, is the prison in which our egos are trapped. The second phase was when I was involved in the organization, but without the necessary intensity of studying his teachings and truly serving his mission. This was perhaps a stage where the focus was on the bhajans and doing seva, and perhaps it was a bit mechanical because there was no real understanding and no clear focus of the ultimate goal of my engagement in the Sai organization. So this would have been in the first, say, 5, 10 years. Then there was the other stage, the third stage, where I was more intensely involved in the work of the organization and his mission. And I can very distinctly say that was when I became national chair in 2002. And that went on for very, very many years. Um, and clearly at that stage, I was no longer tipping my toes into the shallow end. I had dived headfirst into the deep end. And those 11 years were such a great gift. I learned so much. I really dedicated my life to the Sai mission and that opportunity of holding that position. But perhaps what was missing during that stage was the level of spiritual maturity needed to be aware of Swami's omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence, of understanding the depth of his teachings and the true purpose of my engagement in the organization. If I could just pause here, the Sai organization is a very action-based organization, and we're so busy doing things. And perhaps that's where I was, being totally engaged in doing things, um, and perhaps less engaged in the being part of being a Sai devotee and what that really, really means and entails and the responsibilities, as I said earlier. But the consolation is that that period, which lasted a very long time, um, the foundation was being made for the Ashok that was made by my past births and the world. That Ashok was being slowly unmade so that it could be remade in the way Swami wants. Then there is the fourth stage where I think I am now. And how do I characterize that stage? Well, the first thing I'd say is I still have a lot to learn, and there's so much to do in order to be remade. But that journey is clearly in progress, visibly in progress. And there are so many blessings because right now there is much greater awareness of his omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence in my life. Most importantly, there's greater awareness of his love and divine hand in my life. And there is a slightly better understanding of his teachings and the purpose of his mission. And what a great blessing it is to be able to look back and see these very distinct phases and to be comforted by the fact that one knows one is making progress and humbly knows that there is more work to do. So, what next? Where next? The rest is up to me and the efforts I make to change myself. The one thing I've learned is that my destiny is in my own hands. And actually, Swami says this, our destiny is in our own hands. And that, I think, brings with it a lot of responsibility. And on that question of responsibility, I've come to realize three things. First, however uncomfortable it may make us feel, we have to be true to ourselves about our shortcomings. You know, Swami uh, teaches us a lot. He taught us a lot. And I can't say that every time I learned the lesson stayed deep in my heart. Sometimes I perhaps didn't appreciate the enormity of the point he was making or the significance of it. Or perhaps the message came and the message left a bit too quickly. But when I talk about being true to ourselves about our shortcomings, Swami used to talk a lot about that when he says focus on your own shortcomings and speak more about your own shortcomings and less about the shortcomings of others. And however wonderful that advice is, the mind is a funny thing. It will always deflect blame from ourselves and project blame onto others for our own shortcomings. But I've come to learn that change only comes to us when we accept our shortcomings and are determined to overcome those shortcomings to improve ourselves. So, the first realization I share with you in this part of my talk is that it's important we confront the demons within us. And I think that is what Swami may have meant when he said, face the devil as the first step towards uh, that 4-stage progress with the F's. The second point and realization I came to is that we are solely responsible for the experiences in our lives and our reactions to the world around us, even to the injustices that we see. If we suffer pain, know one thing: we are responsible for it. If we are loved by others, we are responsible for it. Um, I always, and this is something I saw quite often when I was national chair, there was a tendency among some people, if they were not happy about anything or upset about anything, to project their pain to the leader, who at that time I was holding that chair. And there was then a wonderful quote from the Buddha that came across my desk on WhatsApp. And it was comforting to me because, you're the attention of people's complaints sometimes. And it said, drinking poison, anger is like drinking poison and accepting the other person to die. Um, and I came to realize that, if we drink poison, we are the ones who suffer. If we are angry, we're the ones who suffer. And so I just remind you, if we suffer pain, we are responsible. Now, what is the consequence of that realization? We have to accept responsibility that the pain that we suffer is only of our own making. Now, I will make this point again in a moment, but that is empowering. We accept responsibility for all the good that happens to us and all the bad that happens to us. That is empowering because it presumes we have the power to change. And that brings me to my third realization. All solutions, and I mean all solutions, are inside of us. They are not outside, contrary to what we've been taught from a very young age. If we change ourselves, our world will change. And ultimately, this aspect of change, I believe, is what our spiritual life is all about. And this idea of accepting responsibility, this idea of changing ourselves to change our world, I think is extremely empowering because it allows us to take steps to make the difference. I know it's difficult because the world has taught us to live outside in, by which I mean so influenced and so reactionary to the environment in which we live. But actually, if one lesson I've learned is instead of living outside in, we should learn to live inside out. By that, I mean we should learn to fix our inside through our sadhana, our meditation, whatever it is, our study. And once we do that, our outer selves will automatically be better, both for our own sake and for the sake of everyone around us. Now, it might be said with good cause that it's easy to say that, difficult to do. And I will tell you that my spiritual journey has really, really been a struggle. Um, One thing I've learned is all the spiritual lessons which I'm seeking to understand, seeking to put into practice, are really counterintuitive to what the world has taught me. Um, it's like two different worlds altogether. As a trained lawyer. I've practiced at the Hong Kong bar for over 30 years. And one of the features about being a barrister, and indeed any other professional, is that we're trained to take great pride in our minds and our intellects and to try to be very logical. And um, but if there's one thing I've learned uh, from my spiritual journey, is that the mind is a terrible servant, but yet I'm sorry, is a terrible master, but a good servant. And so when Swami says master the mind, I now understand what he meant so many years ago. The mind from which the ego emerges can lead you into so much trouble. It can set your thinking in a certain way, and we can be so attached to those thinking patterns. And yet, spirituality teaches so many lessons. If you want to be happy, give happiness first. If you want respect, give respect first. Let go of even your own thoughts. Let go of everything. Your possessions do not give you happiness. The world is a great delusion. All of these lessons are counterintuitive to the learning that our success is to be found in this material world in which we are to find Shangri-La. And that's why earlier on I talked about the world is the prison in which our egos are trapped. And so the journey is very difficult. The lessons are so counterintuitive to what we've learned before. But we have to be determined and go through this journey and go through the struggles. And that is why duty, discipline, determination are so important. That is why having single-minded focus on the teachings of the Guru, avoiding distractions, living simply are so important, so that we can purify ourselves and focus our mind and bring it to the lotus feet of the Lord. So it's a tough journey, and I've come to learn the Mahabharata that we hear about in the Bhagavad Gita actually happens within each of us, and we have to fight like Arjuna to overcome those demons. So in that journey, it's been a long one, as I said. I've learned so many things, and I'd like to share some very distinct lessons with you in the hope that it will help you in their reflections. One of the things I strongly believe is, we all make mistakes, and we all don't mean to, but we do. I can't change my past. What I can do is change my present. What I can also do is share some of the lessons in the hope that others don't make some of the mistakes I did. And so this is what it is. As a preface, I'd say this: being involved in Psi organization has been the greatest boon of my life. And Swami, in his absolute mercy, picked me up just before I went to university, kept me in the organization throughout the time I was in university, kept me in the organization when I came back from university and I started my career. And then he gave me an office, a position to serve him. And he's kept me in this organization all this time. So I don't really know anything else except the Psi organization. And in this organization, I've had some really wonderful experiences. We were involved in doing education work in China. So I've traveled to a province next to Tibet, where I've stayed in a one-star Muslim hotel. I've been, and that was an experience. And sometimes you ask yourself late at night when you go back to the small hotel room, what am I doing here? And then, you realize it's such an enriching experience. I've given a talk at a university in China when I was waiting my turn to speak, 5 other gentlemen came and sat right next to me. And you immediately have this uncomfortable feeling that, they might be police or security. And later on, when I was speaking, they were listening. And at lunch, we found out they were, in fact, secret police. And they came into our lecture theater, not because of what we were doing, but because they were looking for Christian missionaries on the university campus. So those are some of the lessons and experiences. And, it's been a great journey. I've learned so much. But in that process, I've also learned about the best and the worst of myself and what I need to do on my spiritual journey inside. Um, and as I said, we need to be true to ourselves. We need to confront the demons in order to work on them. So I begin, I had my one and only interview with Swami. I think it was just the beginning of 1993. It was not the first, it was the second or third of January. I'd gone for Christmas, and that was the one interview I had, and it was wonderful. He spoke to me, and at that trip, a very senior officer of the international organization said something to me, which, again, at that time I didn't understand it, but took on profound meaning later. And he said, "You do God's work, and God will do your work." Now, the problem is these sort of words sound extremely cliche, but I will tell you, they are literally true. And the one thing you should always be assured about is the second part of that equation. I don't know how much we will do God's work, but I assure you that if we do God's work, He will do His part. He will do our work. That's without a doubt. And I've seen enough of that to believe that from the bottom of my heart. The years when I was national chair in Hong Kong were, in fact, the busiest years in my legal practice. I made the most money in those years. Of course, I was running one and a half jobs almost, and I did not give enough time, for example, to the upbringing of my children. I left a lot to my wife. But I've seen how these kids have grown up, one of whom is deeply involved in the international mission of Swami. And I know for certain he brought up my children, without a doubt, because I certainly didn't do it. And my wife did a wonderful job. But the way they've turned out, it can only have been Swami's blessings on them. So believe in that. Now, over the many years of being involved in the SSSIO organization, being national chair, I've had to ask people to do Swami's work, and I have to assign some of that work. And I've heard people say we must be very practical and give attention to one's worldly duties first. And to be quite honest with you, I've been very amused by such comments because, in my experience, Swami is the most practical person I've ever known. And to say we must be practical almost somehow suggests he's not very practical. He doesn't know what it entails to live in this world. I mean, I dare say that if he wasn't so practical, I would have been struck down by lightning many times for my many transgressions. Yet I have found he has been very forgiving, very gracious, ever giving new opportunities to learn and to correct myself. And so if there's anybody who's not played their part in that equation, it has to be me who from time to time has failed. So, this idea of being practical, I think one has to give attention to one's personal duty. There's no doubt about that. The whole premise of the Bhagavad Gita is living in the world. The whole premise of Swami's teachings is living in the world. But we can live in the world and have faith and confidence in Him and surrender to Him. And I dare say that we need not be so afraid of diving into the deep end of loving Him and serving in His mission, knowing He will take care. And I've seen that many, many times. I told you in the younger days we heard lessons and we sometimes don't always appreciate the significance of what Swami was telling us. And one illustration, and that because it was so counterintuitive to what we were taught in the world and what we were seeking to achieve in the world. And one illustration of that was when Swami said, "Love my uncertainty." And I must confess to you, when I was much younger, I would say, what sort of comment is that? Because we were trained to take pride in our mind and our intellect and the things that we did. And we somehow believed that by all the things that we did, that knowledge we had, that power within us that we were accumulating, that we could achieve greater certainty in life. What a delusion. You know, the work I did over time was clinical negligence, suing doctors, acting for doctors. And you come to realize one thing, that saying in Christianity, there, but for the grace of God you go, is literally true. That is how far each one of us is away from an accident that could change and upend your life in an instant. Um, so this sort of search for certainty in our lives is an illusion. And when Swami said, love my uncertainty, what I now understand is, as I said earlier, have faith, confidence in me, surrender to me. I will take care. And so we need not today be overly anxious or overly worried about things that may or may not happen 5, 10 years down the road. We can rest assured that if we put our lives into his hands with faith, with intensity, with single-mindedness, he will take care. And, I have had so many situations and examples where things have happened, good things, and they can only be attributed to him. And there's one specific thing happened a few years ago, which was not supposed to happen. I put an application in for something I was not supposed to succeed, and I did. And I can only think it was his gift. And so, when we engage ourselves in Swami and his mission, when we really seek him and love him, I think you will very quickly witness his divine hands actively at work in your life. Um, so much that has happened would not have happened without his grace, and for that I'm deeply grateful. And so the first thing I just remind everyone, do God's work, God will do your work. The second lesson I want to sort of share is our mind and our egos have been lying to us all along. All our education, our skill, our cleverness will not deliver the happiness and self-satisfaction we seek in the material world. The money and pride we have and all the outer trappings of success are actually hindrances that prevent us from knowing ourselves and discovering the side within us. All I will say is all that glitters may well be gold, but it actually blinds us to the truth about ourselves. Which brings me to the third point I'd like to make, and there are two short extracts from a letter Swami wrote to Charles Penn, which really had a tremendous impact on me at the very beginning of my service. I was fortunate they came to my attention. In that letter, Charles Penn said many things, but I'd like to share two. Only those whom I have called can serve me. I have prepared you for this work over many incarnations. I have drawn you to me. How does one begin to understand the enormity of these words? Where he says, I have prepared you over many incarnations to do this work. The only thing I know is this, whether I understand the enormity or not, this opportunity may not come again in 100 births. It may never come again, and therefore must be seized now. This life is very sacred. Why should we dedicate it to things that won't matter a bit when suffering befalls us or when we die? So I say, the only thing I suggest we need to do is firstly, ask Swami what he wants us to do, and that he helps us to do it, and to know the purpose of our birth and to achieve it. That's what I, in my morning prayers, very often ask Swami, what do you want? Help me to do it. Help me understand it. And in that process, I think we get a better sense of the purpose of our birth. We all seek to experience him within. And we should pine for answers And for some, it may be how to give up the anger that is within us and to become loving, compassionate beings. That may just be our mission in life, so that that compassion becomes the qualities that define us in our next birth, and not the anger with which we came into this birth. And Lord Krishna said, whatever progress we make on the spiritual life is not lost when we move forward. So, the message Swami gave to Charles Penn: only those whom I have called can serve me. I have prepared you for this work over many incarnations. I have drawn you to me. Imprint them in your heart. The next lesson I want to share is the reason of our participation in the Sai mission. For many, it is the bhajans or the seva, but I always feel these are just means to an end. They are not the supreme purpose of joining. Let it be very clear. The only purpose of our engagement in the Sai organization is so that we purify our hearts and minds to earn Swami's grace, that we may know our own truth, who we are. Really, that is the only purpose of engagement in the Sai organization. Purify our hearts and minds to know who we are. He tells us we are children of God. I'm sorry, I withdraw that. He tells us we are God, but we don't really believe it. But we need to work on ourselves so that we become to realize it. If that is something we're not yet ready for, that we are God, at least let us know we are children of God. We are the princes and princesses in the kingdom of God. And we should strive each day to live with that nobility of character. That is clearly within us if we work hard with our sadhana. And the rest will unfold when Swami thinks it's ready. Many, many years ago, when I was at the earlier stages of my journey, we had a very eminent Sai devotee come and speak in the Hong Kong Center. And one of the things he said is, Swami brings out the worst in you. And I thought, well, that's rather odd. And the very next thing he said is, so that you can see it and deal with it. It brings me back to what I said earlier. Confront the demons within you. Be true to yourselves. Know that those demons are within you, so that we can deal with them. We know what we must do. There is clarity and purpose in our spiritual life. Get rid of the anger. Get rid of the egotism. Get rid of the jealousy. It becomes very clear if we are true to ourselves and not deflect blame. We need to look honestly at ourselves and make a choice. I'm sorry, but far too often I've seen people acting in the organization from the egos. And all that sometimes happens is that they are digging deeper the hole that their egos have put them into. So what I would say to all of us is that we should all stop digging and climb out of that hole by paying attention to what Swami teaches us, by putting into practice those teachings and making ourselves better. And, he's given us all the tools. The Sathya path is a wonderful path. It requires constant study, requires contemplation on the teachings, self-reflection, requires practice. It requires meditation or silent contemplation, if you like, so that we hear the voice of the Lord within. And I assure you of one thing: the Lord does listen actively, and he responds. And I've had situations where in my morning prayers, thoughts come to me. I don't want to pretend I hear his voice, but thoughts come to me. And if there's one thing I've learned, is that if a thought comes to me in my morning prayer, act on it. He has literally saved my neck by some of these thoughts that have come to me. I get up and go and do something, and you realize, thank God I've done it. And if I never gave Anu a firm title for the presentation, but I now realize it may well have been Shravanam Manamanam and Nididhyasanam. follow the teachings, contemplate, change yourself. And this idea of change brings me to one of the strong thoughts I have. And that is our faith in Swami is only of any value to us if it transforms us. And one thing I've believed, rightly or wrongly, is if our faith does not change us, then perhaps our faith is wanting or of no value to us. It must change us. It is hard work, but we have to do it. No one can do it for us. Even Swami won't do it for us. He'll wait patiently, but we have to do the hard work. And in that journey, we will make mistakes. In fact, in any journey in life, we will make mistakes. But Swami, in his graciousness, simply calls them mistakes, which require retakes. And we must dedicate ourselves to that process. Because, as I said earlier, and I speak for myself, I desperately want to be unmade, to throw off all the thinking, all the baggage of the past, and to be remade in his mold. One of the sweetest things anyone said to me in life, which I'll always remember, was, in fact, Anil Kumar. He'd come to Hong Kong once, and we were entertaining him. And then one day someone said to me, could they take him to a very scenic vantage point where they could see the whole city? And I said, okay, by all means, do take him if you want to. I'll go back to work. And so they went off. And then I realized that when they were heading back to his hotel, that they had to pass by my office. So I asked the devotee if they would just stop the car, and he could come up and come into my office. And I thought it'd be a great blessing to have him there. And I'm very, very blessed because the view I have from my office is of the harbor in Hong Kong, and it's a nice view. And he came, Anil, and I told him, sir, would you please sit in my chair? And he sat in my chair and he looked at that view. And he said the sweetest things. He said, it's so nice to see one of Swami's boys reach these positions. And no one had ever called me before then Swami's boy. And it is the sweetest, most valuable things that I will treasure for always, to be called Swami's boy. But I dare say we are all Swami's boys and girls. We just need to rise up to it and, be willing to offer ourselves to him, to empty ourselves so that he can remake us in the way he wants us to be. So here's the crux in your operations in the organization. The organization is the platform to do all these things. It is, unfortunately, the place where we will sometimes express the worst of ourselves. But it is also the place where we can express the best of ourselves. But it certainly is the place that inspires us to be the best, inspire us, and gives us the opportunity to move closer to Sai. And so I say any thought, word, or deed in our interactions in the Sai organization that take us away from Sai, leave it alone. Walk away from it. Focus on one thing only in the Sai organization. Loving Sai in all our thoughts, words, and deeds. There's only one purpose for my engagement in the Sai organization. For me to experience my Guru's love for me at all times, and for me to finally realize that he and I are one, just as he said. There is nothing else. Really, whether you talk about the positions, and I've had many, the recognition, the ability to sing good bhajans, the ability to complete difficult seva projects, all of these amount to nothing if we do not do everything we can to experience his love and realize there is only him. He is the only reason. I wish I could shout this out to you. There is nothing else. And, we need to be very cautious about these things because Swami himself warned us. He said time and time again that we want the trinkets and trash from him, but we don't want him. I mean, stop and think about that, is what the Guru is saying. We want the trinkets and trash, but we don't want him. And if there's one thing I've come to learn, is the trinkets and trash are not worth it. They're burdensome. But want him and you have everything. And if we seek the trinkets and trash, if that's all we want from him, then perhaps we have not understood our purpose, his purpose and his mission, and our purpose in all that, and that perhaps we have lost our way. So I'd like to end this section of my talk, and I'm conscious of time, by sharing with you the Lord's Prayer, and just some thoughts I had developed on it. So you all know it. O Lord, take my love and let it flow in fullness of devotion to thee. O Lord, take my hands and let them work incessantly for thee. O Lord, take my soul and let it be merged in one with thee. O Lord, take my mind and thoughts and let them be in tune with thee. O Lord, take my everything and let me be an instrument to work. In the first line, Swami speaks of bhakti or devotion. But this is love for God in all his manifestations in his creation. In the second line, he speaks of seva or selfless love. But it is loving God in all his manifestations in this creation. So already you know where love all, serve all comes from. In the third line, he speaks about the individual jiva merging with the Paramatma, where by our meditation we experience oneness with all creation. And that's something I will come back to when I speak a little bit about the environment. In the fourth line, he speaks about giving up individual will so that we can live only in God's will. And that brings me back to the prayer, don't ask anything of Swami except, what do you want of me? Tell me what you want of me and I'll do it. Don't let me give you my bucket list. Give up individual will so that we live only in God's will. In the last line, he speaks of that total state of surrender, where we are completely dedicated to the Lord's mission on earth, because it has become our mission on earth. So, I hope some of these reflections have been helpful. It's been gleaned over a long time. As I said, it's been a slow journey. Sometimes it's been a difficult journey. But my God, what a blessed journey to have Swami in my life. And as clear as the light of day is, I know Swami is with me in my heart, guiding me in everything I do. I believe the books I read is because he wants me to read those books. If I've made a mistake, the lesson he wants me to learn is clear. And he's holding my hand. He's guiding me. He's taking care of my career. He's taking care of my kids. Utterly confident in that. So the one message is, reflect deeply on your spiritual life, your journey. And he will grant you the biggest boons you could ever imagine. On this point, when I was president of the Science Center, this organization in Hong Kong, people used to say we need balance in life. Again, it's a bit like they saying, we need to be practical. I always was sort of amused at that. Because, asking for balance in life is almost wanting to have one foot in the world and one foot in the Sai organization or under Swami's umbrella. I don't know if we can, to be honest. Put both feet in Swami's, under Swami's umbrella, and live in the world accordingly. And the world becomes an easier place to navigate. With our focus on Swami, we can go about doing all our duties in a very good way with Him carrying us. Um, so, don't ever be afraid of diving deep in. I did, and it's the greatest blessing in my life. I'd like to move along in a little bit of time I have to talk about environmental sustainability. I thankfully have been chair of that committee for a few years now, and it's been again a great blessing, a great learning, and I don't have a history in environmental work, and there were a lot of people who were better qualified because of their professional work in the environment. And Swami, for some reason, chose me, and he gave me great people to work with, who I depend heavily upon to guide me. But it's been the greatest boon, and I've learned a lot. Um, and but the points I'm going to make now, I actually not even focused on the physical sciences, nor strictly on the environment. Um, I believe environmental sustainability in the Psi organization, being a spiritual organization, bringing something unique to the conversation, is the focus on the relationship between God, nature, and man, which of course has a clear bearing on the environment. I think the problem with any discussion about the environment, and the reason why people have skepticism about the commitment of governments and corporations to effectively dealing with climate change, is that man sees nature and the environment as something separate from us. We do not see nature and man as part of God's creation, interdependent and interconnected. And from this perspective of separation that we focus upon, unfortunately, we see the environment as something that there is for us to exploit. And so we end up destroying it. And in fact, we have gone so far in abusing nature, in destroying the environment, that we're now destroying ourselves. I was very fortunate to be involved in the 2018 Go Green conference because I was part of the media team. And they produced a very, very wonderful booklet called Nature, the Vesture of God, which is on sathya.org under the Environmental Sustainability Hub. And I'd encourage all of you to read it because it's a tremendous wealth of information in that book. Practical information about climate change, Swami's teachings, teachings of other faith traditions, human values, and practical things the organization is doing. Go read that book. It's wonderful. I helped edit that, and I was fortunate because it gave me an education whilst editing. And a few months before that, I helped put a paper together as part of my seva in the Hong Kong organization called Mother Earth. And it was a series of papers I was writing on the different subjects, which now are part of the Public Outreach Committee's material that they have on their website. And in the course of preparing Mother Earth, I came to realize that actually all the religions speak about this relationship between God, nature, and man. The Abrahamic religions tend to speak about man as a custodian of this gift of God, whilst in Buddhism, Hinduism, and some of the indigenous faith traditions, they emphasize that man is an inseparable part of nature and that both exist only in God and because of God's love. And that's, a very distinct philosophy, but so important to understand that we are interconnected and interdependent with nature, inseparably, and that we all exist in God. If you go through the nature book, you will find a quotation which I think encapsulates Swami's teachings very well, because he's actually been speaking about the environment since 1967. The quote is, "You have to realize that nature is a manifestation of God. Hence, nature should not be ignored. Nature is the effect and God is the cause. You should recognize the immanence of the divine in the entire cosmos." 20th June 1996. It's always important to keep at the forefront of our understanding that nature is a manifestation of the will of God, that nature is the effect and God is the cause. If you forget anything, don't forget those two things. But what is the practical implication of this? Well, we put it very simply and very directly. You cannot say you love God if at the same time you destroy His creation or you abuse His creation. That's how direct it is. But that is what we do minute by minute. When we leave the tap on mindlessly, when we put the air conditioner on and put the lights on in a room and then just leave for half an hour and not come back. Those are just small examples in our day-to-day life. We need to reflect upon our assertion that we love God. Really give thought to it. Once he told his students, when they kept telling him that they love him, he said, "You don't love me, you like me." And they were, of course, taken aback. But he made it very clear that if you love God, you have to obey God. And so I say to all listeners, your love of God is correlated to your relationship with nature. And why I say that? God, nature, man. So what should we do? In a discourse on the 18th of July 1996, Swami said, God's creation is very sacred. Do not pollute it. In another discourse on the 13th of February 1987, he said, there can be no objection to man enjoying the resources of nature. But as a result of uncontrolled desires and reckless exploitation of natural resources, nature is exhibiting frightening disorders. Swami said, do not pollute it. And we need to look a bit below the surface. Every time we go and buy a t-shirt, there is a phase of sourcing the cotton, etc. There's a phase of transporting that cotton to the factory. There's a stage of production. There's a stage of packing. There's a stage of transporting that t-shirt from the factory across the seas to our countries. There's a phase of transport within our countries. Every phase potentially involves pollution. And so when he says don't pollute it, he's not simply meaning don't throw rubbish into the sea. Essentially, I think it involves consume much less, because every stage of your consumption involves pollution. And in the second quote I read, he says, he speaks about uncontrolled desires, reckless exploitation of nature, and nature's reactions. We have to limit our desires. We have to live simply, consume in moderation, practice a ceiling on desires, and develop purity in our hearts and minds. That is what I think he's talking about in these quotes. And these are very, very good environmental habits. And they all sort of sit beautifully with Buddhism and Hinduism and what one reads in the Bhagavad Gita, when it is stated, all the cause of our suffering is our desires. So we have to pay very, very close attention to what Swami tells us. Because firstly, this is the instruction of the Guru, and also because it's important for our spiritual growth. We have to come to terms with our desires. Consume less, focus more on Sai. Another principle that is often forgotten in the context of environmental sustainability, but which is emphasized in all these religions, is the principle of oneness in all creation, which means that we need to overcome this sense of separation and the delusion that our individualistic ego identity is our real identity. We are far beyond the body-mind complex that we associate with. Learn to see Swami in the trees, in the river, in the grass. Swami himself said everything in creation is just a different combination of the 5 elements. The scientists will tell you everything in creation is just energy composed in a certain way. The chair is energy. Humans are energy. Just the composition is different. Divine is in the chair. Divine is in the human. Just different levels of awakeness, perhaps. Swami is everywhere. And if we can get his darshan in the trees, in the river, in the grass. How wonderful it would be, because we would see him everywhere at all times. These are some of the thoughts on environmental sustainability I'd like to share. And I'm inviting you to look at environmental sustainability as a spiritual topic and to view the making of new environmentally friendly habits as part of our sadhana. Do not divorce your sadhana from environmental sustainability work, from good environmental habits. So when you brush your teeth and you're very mindful of the water you use, when you're very mindful of the electricity you use, see that as part of your sadhana. And that's where you connect Swami to environmental sustainability work. And I think if the 5 or so billion people of the earth who are people of faith, if they could use their faith in God as the motivation for their good environmental habits, I think the planet will be a much better place. So I've come to an end. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope there's something I've shared which is of value to you. And Om Sara.